Greetings, namaste, alafia, assalamu alaikum, what's happening? I hope you all had a great day. I'm here to give you your purple nightcap. It's coming from She Called Me Woman, Nigerians Queer Women Speak. And yesterday I gave you your nightcap and I spoke briefly about Dayo's testimony. And for context, I want to inform you that Dayo, this is not her actual name. I named her Dayo, which means it's a Nigerian name, which means joy will come. Because as I read her testimony, it seemed that joy found her at a greater pace as she accepted her authenticity, who she really was. To give you context, the former part of her life, she, up until like 8 years old, she lived life as a boy. But she also realized that she liked doing feminine things. She liked doing things that ladies do. She wore unisex clothes. She swayed when she walked. Based off her description of herself during that age, I can imagine she was very sassy, right? Her mother approved of her in her former years until she came out, which was, I think, in her 20s. She was 20. But anyway, her mother gave her this immense amount of love until the age of 20. And what shifted, the relationship shifted between her and her mother when her mother was bombarded with all these theological thoughts and perspectives about who Dayo was, what she was doing, what was mentally occurring with her, right? So as Dayo's mother received all this theological suppression, and oppression in a way, that reflected towards Dayo in a way, in the means of disapproval, right? So her mother disapproved of her sexuality, although she seemed to be supportive of it in the beginning. In her testimony, Dayo says that she just gathered the boldness to come out to her mother, and her mother said she thought it was a demon speaking through her, right? And her mother stole her agency from her, meaning she didn't get a chance to tell her brothers about her sexuality. Her mother outed her, so she stole her agency. And her mother instructed her brothers to beat her daily. So Dayo was beat daily in her own household by her brothers. I don't think it was an attempt to eradicate the demon that was in her, but I think it was a form of punishment from her mother. The safest space that Dayo had was school. It wasn't the safest place, but it was safer than her household, right? And she made this statement after she briefly illustrated the abuse she received from home. She stated, "I was not interested in a relationship or even sex. I just love myself," right? And I think that's a very bold statement. I think that Dayo, in the complexity of her situation and with her sexuality unraveling before her eyes as a way for her to accept who she really is, I think the fact that she just loved herself is very bold and audacious, right? Because many of us may not find ourselves in such complex situations and we're still struggling to love ourselves, right? Even though her mother started to hate her, even though she was being abused by her brothers, she just loved herself. She didn't mentally figure out why she was born a boy, when she was born with male genitalia. And although she believed and felt that she was a woman, there's still like mental processes that she was struggling with. But even in the midst of that, she still loved herself. She just loved herself. And I think that it's interesting when she said that she wasn't interested in a relationship or sex because she just loved herself. Like, she sat in that space of just loving herself without engaging any romantic relationships with anybody else, without engaging sexual activity with anybody else, right? She just dwelt in the space of the fact that she just loved herself. Now, many of us can't do that, right? Because we didn't have the tools from the beginning to understand what it means to love ourselves, right? We had to go through trials and errors in order to learn. I'm not saying that Dayo didn't, but many of us enter into relationships because we don't love ourselves. And when we get in those relationships, we expect other people to love us. And what they give us isn't really love, but it's trash and crumbles. And we accept that. We get accustomed to that. And that becomes our expectation, the crumbs and the trash, right? I was telling my sister the other day, this is real personal. I was telling my mom and sister the other day, I don't think I ever been chosen, right? Because as women in my generation and women in my mama generation, And before her, you grow up with this notion of, oh, I have to be chosen, right, by a male. I have to be chosen, I have to be chosen. I was very ecstatic for my sister because we 13 years apart. She doesn't have to grow up with that notion. They grow up with the notion of, I'm going to choose myself, right? I'm just not getting to the point where I'm choosing myself, right? Where I am purging things from me that doesn't necessarily benefit me, and understanding what it means to be in a space to employ tools and practices to engage my own self-love that dwells within me. I think the ability to love yourself and to employ self-love lies in our divinity, right? But you have to tap into that. So I think that before we begin to seek romantic relationships, before we engage ourselves in sexual practices, and I'm not saying that masturbation is wrong, I'm not saying that, having a cut buddy is wrong, but I think you need to have some foundational elements about yourself. Some foundational elements with yourself, which is self-love, before you throw yourself in these relationships, right? Or these spaces. So I think, considering the complexity of her situation and her sexuality, because being trans is not an easy thing, right? What was I saying? So I think it was a very bold move for her to say, I just love myself. I don't think many queer people can grow up saying that I just love myself in the beginning and this young in their life. Like, over time, yes, it happens. But the fact that she knew that she loved herself at such a young age, despite the abuse and injustice she received, speaks a lot about the knowledge and awareness of who she truly was. Like, sometimes we don't love ourselves because we don't know who the hell we are, right? Dio knew who she was, and I think it was very bold and audacious for her to know that despite the fact that I don't have a relationship, despite the fact that she never had sex with a man, she just loved herself. And sometimes I think we need to sit in the space of just loving ourselves instead of seeking other avenues that will love us before we choose to love ourselves. Ashe. Hope you guys have a great night.